The UN library will have to open a new fiction section for the countless letters that they sent to the Security Council by the Palestinian delegate distorting the truth. We need to speak truthfully about the problems plaguing the Middle East. It seems that the states are so heavy on the criticism of Israel, are also light on the facts. Allow me to dispel a number of myths. Myth number one: some nations seem to believe that a great injustice was done to the Palestinian people when the UN voted to petition the British Mandate Palestine into two states. In fact, in 1947, Resolution 181, which divided the British Mandate over Palestine, it speaks of the creation of a Jewish state no fewer than 25 times. The resolution declared, and I quote, that independent Arab and Jewish states shall come into existence. End of quote. The Jews welcomed the plan and joyously declared a new state in their ancient homeland. But the Arabs rejected the plan and, joined by the armies of 5 Arab nations, launched a war of annihilation against the newly born Jewish state. 65 years later, you still don't hear the Palestinians talk about 2 states for 2 people. Sure, Palestinian leaders call for an independent Palestinian state, but they insist that the Palestinian people return to the Jewish state. This is a euphemism for the destruction of the state of Israel and a major hurdle to peace. Myth number 2. Some in this room are convinced that the root of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the settlements. In fact, from the time Israel gained its independence in 1948 until 1967, the West Bank was in Jordanian hands and Gaza was in Egyptian hands. Throughout this time, there was not a single settlement. Yet the Palestinians still sought our destruction. And where were the Arab states? They did not lift a finger to create a Palestinian state and instead sought our destruction. Today, just 2% of the Israeli population lives in settlements, but they're blamed for 100% of the problems. I have said it before and I'll say it again. The settlements aren't the major hurdle to peace. The real obstacle to peace is the Palestinians' quest for the so-called right of return. Myth number 3. Palestinian delegations sent letters to the Council accusing Israel of denying people freedom of worship. The only denying taking place is the denial of the facts on the ground. One of the first acts that Israel undertook after reuniting Jerusalem in 1967 was to abolish discriminatory laws and safeguard access to religious sites for all people of all faiths. This was in contrast to pre-1967, when everyone but Jews could access Jerusalem. Since Israel introduced religious freedoms in 1967, people of all faiths have been able to visit the holy sites of Jerusalem. In contrast, Palestinian leadership breeds incitement and stirs up violence on the Temple Mount. They even went so far as to accuse Israel of altering the nature of Jerusalem. In fact, it is the Palestinians who are altering the nature of Jerusalem. They are destroying artifacts and distorting history in an effort to erase all traces of an ancient Jewish presence. The word silence in response to these crimes have been deafening. Ever since King David laid the cornerstone for his palace 3,000 years ago, Jerusalem has served and will continue to serve as the eternal capital of the Jewish people. Instead of accusing Israel of restricting freedom of movement, Palestinians should be concerned with holding free elections. Let me remind you that Abbas's term expired in the year 2009, and since then, he has been extending his term without elections. Where are all the concerned voices from the defenders of democracy? Any member state in this chamber said something or raised his voice about the issue of elections? I'm sure that many countries would enjoy the chance to cancel or postpone elections when the polling doesn't look good. Let me remind you all of an important truth. In real democracy, one election doesn't earn you the right to rule forever. Myth number 4. Israel has been accused of creating humanitarian crisis in Gaza by restricting the free movement of goods. In fact, every month, trucks carrying hundreds and thousands of tons of goods, including food, medical equipment, and construction materials, pass from Israel into the Gaza Strip. In its past reports, the Special Secretariat has criticized Israel for restricting the entry of construction materials. How many of you have asked us to allow cement into Gaza so that the Palestinians can build houses? And yet, when we do, in exchange of our goods and goodwill, Israel is repaid with tunnels of terror. Just a week ago, the IDF discovered a 2-kilometer tunnel originating in Gaza and ending just outside an Israeli community, not far from the homes, kindergartens, and playgrounds. The tunnel was built by Hamas using 500 tons of cement that have been earmarked for construction. I'll repeat that again. 500 tons of cement. To understand how much that is, the Statue of Liberty weighs 225 tons. Just imagine how many schools, hospitals, and homes could have been built. In taking responsibility for building the tunnel, a Hamas spokesman said, and I quote, "This tunnel was made by the hand of the fighters of Al-Qassam, and they will not sleep in their efforts to hit the occupation and kidnap soldiers." Instead of building houses, Hamas is building smuggling tunnels. And instead of building schools, they're building terror networks. This is the reality that Israel has to live with every day. Instead of using construction materials to build a better future for the Palestinians and the Palestinian people, the leadership in Gaza is committed to destroying the state of Israel. It may just be my hearing, but I've yet to hear the countries that demand Israel allow more cement into Gaza condemn these crimes. Myth number 5, some countries around this table believe that international forces should be on the border to guarantee a future peace agreement. That's interesting, because history has shown that Israel can't rely on others to ensure its security. While we support the work of the UN forces on our borders, history has shown that Israel cannot rely on the international community to ensure its own security. This was the case with UNEF 1 in the Sinai Desert and with UBAM in Gaza. The recent involvement of certain UN bodies has hardly been helpful. In his remark earlier, the Secretariat spoke about an incident last month in Kfar Mahul. The report neglects to note that following a review by Israel's Supreme Court, the buildings in question were determined to be illegally constructed. In light of this important fact, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, also known as OCHA, needs reminding that its role is coordination of humanitarian aid, not aiding the obstruction of justice. Now, OCHA systematically abuses and disregards Israel's authority on the ground. It seems that the only thing the Office of Coordination is not doing is coordinating with Israel. Mr. President, it's time to stop pointing fingers and it's time to stop laying blame at Israel's doorstep. Israel remains committed to 2 states for 2 people. We're ready to make an historic compromise to realize the creation of a demilitarized Palestinian state living side by side with the Jewish state of Israel. Israelis and Palestinians will have to work together to create new and lasting solutions to old problems. This will only be possible if our work is built on the foundation of truth, mutual recognition, and security. A great convulsion is shaking the Middle East from the Straits of Hormuz to the Straits of Gibraltar. The tremors have shattered states and toppled governments, and the ground is still shifting. The region stands at a crossroad and is not yet clear if freedom and moderation will triumph over tyranny and fundamentalism. Let this be the moment in history when all people seek understanding instead of accusations, when nations strive for harmony instead of dissonance, and when our family of nations shows the conviction, the conscience, and courage to make peace possible. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement.